Welcome to the People Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things people performance. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. If you've listened to our podcast and you want to get in touch and find out a little bit more about what we do or how we can help and support you, reach out via help@trans2performance.com. You can stream and listen to our podcast on all available platforms. So for now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
So welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Martin Johnson. Today we're going to record another Leader Lounge episode where I talk around 15-20 minutes around a subject matter that hopefully is thought-provoking and interesting for the audience. Today I'm going to talk about the attributes. I'll just set the scene on the attributes. It's a psychometric profile we use here at T2, which was developed by Rich Davini, who was a former Navy SEAL commander of SEAL Team 6 over in the US. Rich is a wonderful partner of ours here at T2. We are the UK licensee for the product of the attributes. And I've learned a lot since working with Rich, on top of the knowledge I already possessed about the humankind. In the attributes, there's 41 human attributes that we stack rank and that we look to unpick of how prevalent they are in a person's personality versus maybe they're a bit lower down the chain and they're not as natural as some of the top ones. 41 attributes is a lot, but we do test them all. Some of the attributes you can imagine, like extroversion or courage or resilience. There's lots of different attributes that are really commonly known to people and that people can get on board with really easy. But there's also some attributes in there that are more surprising, let's say, more controversial, and are therefore less comfortable for people to operate with when it appears in their report. So I want to talk in this podcast around some of the more controversial the attributes that separate opinion or that make people feel at times slightly uncomfortable. The first one I'm going to go straight in with is narcissism. Now, narcissism is certainly here in the UK, but I think around the globe is largely connected to narcissistic personality disorder. The connotation of the word narcissism can be negative. I was talking to Amy off camera and I said, I think you've got narcissism in you just like I have in me. And she was absolutely shocked. But when we unpicked it, actually it makes more sense. So let me read the definition of narcissism according to the official attributes definition. It is the desire to stand out, be noticed, recognized, or adored. So when you think about that, narcissism is in us all. We all have, to an extent, a desire to stand out, be noticed, recognised, or adored. I certainly do, otherwise I probably wouldn't do this job for a living. I enjoy standing on a stage, or I enjoy working with a group of people, and if I can help them and it goes down well and I feel like I've made a difference, then I absolutely get something back, and I enjoy that. Narcissism is not around... It's all about being recognised, standing out and being adored to the extent at the detriment of other people. It's definitely not that. That would then start to tip into narcissistic personality disorder. If you're trying to have your needs met at the cost of all else and everybody else, that's not healthy. But if you strip it back at a normal level, narcissism is in us all. We all have some desire to want to stand out, be recognised or noticed. And so narcissism appears in the stack rank and some people flinch. If narcissism is in your top 5 attributes, some people really struggle with that because it's their worst nightmare to think they are narcissistic. It does not mean that. But what it does mean is you have an internal driver to stand out, be recognised or be noticed. And that's really good because it will fuel that your actions. You will go above and beyond for others and you will commit to situations and endeavours so much because you know you're going to get something back at the end of it. So high narcissism can actually be a real quality in driven people. We see it a lot in entrepreneurs, in incredibly driven people who are unapologetic about going above and beyond, but there's something in it for them too. Low narcissism is not good or bad either. Low narcissism can mean you don't really like the feeling of being recognized, noticed, or adored. And actually, these are the people who don't champion themselves. They don't put their head above the parapet. They don't shout about their achievements. Now, that can be humble. We'll come to humility later. That can appear humble, but it can absolutely sabotage and inhibit your ability to get on in certain endeavors. So high or low narcissism is not good or bad. It's just what it is. And I think I have moderately high narcissism. It's upper medium in my category, because I absolutely have a desire to stand out, be noticed, or be admired. But what that does for me is it makes me incredibly driven to go above and beyond for others. So it's mutual. It's mutually beneficial. The second one I'm going to talk about is cunning. So cunning is an interesting word, certainly here in the UK. Cunning could have a connotation of sly or manipulative. The cunning fox, as an example. And so people don't like cunning because it suggests some sort of deceit in the behaviour. But let me read out the definition of cunning according to the attributes. Cunning is the ability to consider problems and circumstances from unusual or unorthodox perspectives to achieve a goal or outcome. So the cunning mind is a really interesting thing. The cunning mind always asks 3 questions. Number 1, are there rules and boundaries? Number 2, are they real or perceived? And number 3, what happens if we break them? The cunning mind, therefore, can arrive in situations where they actually determine that there is a better way to do this, or we can work around this problem and still deliver the outcome without consequence. Sometimes if we stay so rigid to a brief or rules or structure or tradition, you've seen it in organisations where we've always done it this way or we've never been allowed to do it that way, and no one has ever taken the opportunity to question it. Well, the cunning mind will. And so it's a real strength to have cunning as an attribute. We do have to watch out for, however, if you're overly cunning and you're asking those 3 questions to every single thing, it can become quite annoying for others, and you can be looking to deviate against a process or a structure or some rules just for the sake of it. So you can't be overly cunning, but the cunning mind in healthy doses is a really important attribute for problem solving and finding unorthodox ways of overcoming problems and issues. The next attribute I'm going to talk about is task switching. Now, a lot of people talk about multitasking. You've probably heard this a lot in the workplace around, I'm a great multitasker, or it's, you have to be able to multitask. Well, in neuroscience and in psychology, it's been debunked over the years that multitasking is a myth. The brain cannot focus effectively on 2 things in any one context. But what the brain can do is it can switch between activities and different contexts effectively, and that is task switching. So it's not about doing 2 things at the same time. It's about switching between 2 things effectively. So, for example, a great task switcher might be somebody who is typing that email or focusing on that spreadsheet and they're in the zone, and then somebody walks in the office for a conversation. They can effectively leave what they are doing, put their head up, have the conversation, and then without delay, they can effectively switch back into the detail that they were previously working in, and they are not deterred by it. They have task switched effectively. Some people would struggle with that if they are in maximum conversation, and Amy won't mind me saying, because she's behind the camera and she gets a mention all the time, she's not great at task switching. If she's immersed in something, a video production or some editing or something like that, and there is noise coming in from the outside or constant disruptions, it really affects the workflow, because the whole process of laser focus, hyper focus is interrupted. So task switching is the ability to shift among tasks and context effectively without delay or trouble. Now, high task switchers are obviously really, really effective in the workplace at dealing with lots of things and spinning lots of plates. They're also really good in quite chaotic, loud environments. If people are lower down in their attribute stack rank on this particular attribute of task switching, we suggest that they're going to thrive better in solace. Like, if they can hide away in a room for an hour and just focus on what they need to do, or work from home for the morning so they don't have any distractions, sometimes that serves them better. Okay, let's move it along. So the next attribute I'm going to put in the mix, which it divides opinion and it creates really interesting debate in the rooms that we work in, is empathy. Now, I'm going to put two in the mix here, empathy and compassion, because quite often we get these mixed up. There is a difference between empathy and compassion. It's subtle, but it's huge in the context of how we apply them. Empathy is the ability, whether deliberate or not, to join another person's emotional state, to feel what someone else feels. I think empathy is less deliberate than it is deliberate. I think it's in you. If you've got high empathy, you have a tendency to naturally feel another person's stress or distress, or you are able to feel and join in their triumph and elation. You naturally feel what other people feel. That's empathy. And I think a lot of that has to be quite innate and quite natural and, down to your biochemistry and the way you are wired. So empathy for me, for example, is really low. It's probably my third lowest attribute of the 41. I don't feel what other people feel easily. I obviously can spot somebody, for example, who is upset or in distress, and I don't instantly absorb that feeling myself. So I wouldn't instantly start feeling emotional or wanting to cry because my empathy is low. But what I do have in abundance is compassion. Compassion is the ability to show sympathy and concern for others. So compassion says, I don't feel what you feel, but I can appreciate how it's making you feel. And therefore, I can offer my service. I can listen. I can offer some counsel and guidance on the situation. So empathy and compassion are different. Empathy is I feel what you feel. Compassion is I don't feel what you feel, but I can appreciate how it's making you feel. For those of you out there, if you've got low empathy, don't think like I did originally that you are a bad human being, right? Don't feel like it's a weakness, because low empathy for me as a leader, for example, comes to the fore when I need to separate emotion from a situation and make a difficult decision that's going to be for the greater good or advance the business forwards. If you've got high empathy, you will struggle to do that because you just can't get past the humanistic element or the consequence of what this may mean. So low empathy can be a strength when you have to make difficult decisions in life, or when you have to look at the greater good and the bigger picture. Low empathy, however, can be a hindrance if you are not picking up on subtle cues of how people are feeling in the moment, which is affecting them. So there's no good or bad a game with this. You've got to just understand and make friends with where your attribute sits and how it serves you well versus how it may not serve you well in other cases. Compassion, however, for those of you who maybe are lower on empathy, you can always dial it up with some compassion, which says, I don't feel how you feel, but I absolutely need to appreciate how it's making you feel, and therefore I will offer my service to support. So it's a really interesting one, and quite often in our sessions, people with low empathy cringe, and because they think like high narcissism makes them a bad human being, people think low empathy makes them a bad human being. There is no good or bad with the attributes. Low attributes serve as well sometimes, and they don't serve as well others. The same with higher scoring attributes. The next one I'm going to talk about is humility. Humility is the ability to be self-aware and transparent about your own strengths and weaknesses. Now, I'm going to bring in an extra one in here in vulnerability because they are different. So if humility is a person's natural ability to recognize their own strengths and weaknesses, vulnerability is to the degree of which I am willing to share that with others. So I could have high humility, which says I know what my strengths are and I also know what my weaknesses are. I do have high humility. I know exactly what my strengths and weaknesses are. But in me, I'm also quite vulnerable. I will be absolutely okay with sharing with people what those strengths and weaknesses are. I've got no problem admitting when I get it wrong. I've got no problem admitting when I'm not that good at something and maybe somebody else should take this on. So high humility and high vulnerability in combination is really good because it allows people to know that you're human, know that you're self-aware, and know that you don't believe that you're all things to all people. And that's incredibly authentic and it warms people to you. What happens when you get high humility with low vulnerability, though, i.e., I'm aware of my strengths and weaknesses, but I am not going to show them in public? That can lead to a very guarded, cagey person, and people struggle to get close to them. They also struggle to trust them because all human beings are flawed and all human beings struggle. But if you're never willing to acknowledge that or show it, people see right through it. So low vulnerability can be a real inhibitor, certainly in the workplace for people and certainly for leaders. What about people who have low humility? They don't have a good understanding of their strengths and weaknesses. They're slightly deluded on what they're good at versus what they're not so good at, but they're super vulnerable. They'll just ooze out that's a nightmare, because if you're willing to share time and time again things that are absolutely contrary to what other people are seeing, your credibility will go through the floor because they'll say, seriously, you think you're good at that? Pooh, I see different. So high vulnerability with low humility can cause a huge problem from a trust and credibility perspective. The final one I'm going to come to is selflessness versus generosity. Selflessness and generosity are very closely linked, but again, they are different when you actually understand the definitions. Most humans would like to think they score high on generosity and selflessness. It's not always the case. Let me describe the two. Generosity is the tendency and readiness to give more of something than is strictly necessary or expected. But what comes with generosity is a bit of payback. So I am a high generous person. And I know this because I tested my attributes, but also the feedback from my team. I do have a tendency and a readiness to give more than what is expected by others. I love giving to people. I love keeping people progressing and making sure that people feel like I am giving, whether it's acts of kindness, whether it's favors, whether it's time, whatever it might be. However, I don't mind admitting that there's always something behind that, isn't there? Because if I am generous and I give, then my team will work exceptionally hard for me and my cause. I get something back. Not that it's premeditated, but it's absolutely linked, and I would never apologize for it. I believe the world works on reciprocation. You do something for me, I do something for you. That's the way humans have collaborated for hundreds of thousands of years. So generosity is I will give more than is expected and necessary, but I get something back in return. Selflessness, however, is placing the needs and well-being of others above one's own, despite a real or perceived risk to doing so. So selflessness comes in the act of, even if this is going to harm me or put me out, or I'm going to get nothing in return, I know you need something, so I'm going to do it for you, even if it's to my own detriment. And selflessness, therefore, is the ultimate selfless act, right? There is no real kickback. There's quite often a trade-off for you, but you're more than willing to do it. And so selflessness, you might go, of the two, is the most wonderfully humane attribute, right? Well, let me tell you this. Generosity works because it's mutual benefit. Selflessness only works in short bursts, because if you are the selfless person who continues to do that time and time again, and there is no kickback for you, in fact, there is only real or perceived risk for you in doing so, you will quickly grow tired of it. It won't be reciprocation, and therefore what can start off as a well-meant endeavour can turn into feeling taken advantage of. it can turn into resentment, and then something is going to break further down the line. So there's no good or bad to these, but the subtle difference between generosity and selflessness is really important to understand. In my stack rank, selflessness is down the bottom, generosity is near the top. So I know I'm a person who will give and give and give more than that is expected, but there has to be something in it for me too. It has to feel mutual reciprocation. I guess there's moments that I will commit to a selfless act, but I guess they would be in incredibly specific moments with certain people who I have a particular relationship with. But generosity is probably what I would lean upon the most. So I've probably talked for quite a bit there. They're just 7 or 8 attributes there that we talk about a lot with our clients and in sessions, and they're always the ones that trigger the biggest debate. Things like, narcissism. It's a very difficult terminology to work with, but like I said earlier, all human beings have a level of narcissism. It is not narcissistic personality disorder that we're talking about. It's just how much do you desire to stand out, be recognized, and acknowledged. Cunning. People think about cunning as sly, manipulative. It's not. The cunning mind is an exceptional mind to have in a team. They are the people who are going to ask 3 questions on every single thing that we try to achieve or every problem we try to overcome. Number 1, are there rules and boundaries? Number 2, are they real or perceived? And number 3, what happens if we break them? The cunning mind leads to some of the best solutions to problems that I've ever witnessed. And therefore, we've got to encourage and dial up a little bit of that attribute at certain times. We talked about the difference between empathy and compassion. Subtle difference, but it means a huge difference in terms of the context and the outcome. If you're low on empathy and you can't feel what other people feel, do not be deterred. You can equally be compassionate, which says, I don't feel it, but I understand how it's making you feel. And then towards the end, we talked about task switching as well, not multitasking. And then right at the end, we looked at generosity versus selflessness. Understanding attributes is incredibly important, and understanding what your natural attributes are and where you're high on certain attributes versus low is incredibly important. High is not good, low is not bad, right? Both are good and bad in different situations. So we've just got to understand what our stack rank is, how they play out in certain situations, and that will result in you being a more self-aware person. So that's all for this Leader Lounge episode. I think we're about on time. We're going to probably return because we've only covered, of the 41, we've only covered 7 or 8 attributes there. It might be good to do a series of these and bring some of the other attributes in at a later stage if you're interested in hearing more about the work we do around this piece. So please comment, please get in touch if it struck a chord with you. If you want to know what your attributes are, you can complete the test with us here at C2. So please email in at help@trans2performance.com and we can arrange for you to take your attributes test and see how you stack up against some of the things we've talked about today. For now, that is where I'll finish, and we'll be back shortly with another People Performance podcast.
The Leader Lounge with Martin Johnson, brought to you by T2.